Hello, my name is Charlene Stevens. I am the founder and editor-in-chief of Arcade Project and a contributing writer at with Hyperallergic. And I would like to thank Latchkey Gallery for inviting me to have this conversation with Marvin Touré.
Hello.
So looking back at your work in the exhibition at Latchkey, I'm looking at two works on paper. One is Black Bile Toys.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
BBC.
Black Bile Toys and the BBC.
It's a so the Black Box Toys toy company, a fictional toy company that I created. I wanted to nestle this kind of this project in a narrative and kind of in fiction, really. After reading Joseph Campbell's Power of Myth, the idea of like how mythology one has just informed me throughout my life and thinking about how creatively fiction has inspired me in different forms, whether it's anime or other any like movies or action film, anything. It's just like fiction being able to put these very um, complex ideas and convey them in a way, but doing it through fiction is something that I inherently saw as powerful. But then also reading it and seeing how it was done over the centuries and seeing how it's such an integral part of like different cultures kind of also further pushed me into leaning more into doing that in my practice. So for this whole body of work, I wanted to contextualize these, art objects, so to speak, in a narrative, in a fiction. The BBC is, this Black Bile Council. These are the founders of Black Bile Toys, and these founders were. This group was created by the excommunicated doctors from the Thorn Institute for the Negro Insane. So it's like fiction that these works come out of. And the BBC is a picture of the founders, but they're a secret organization, so that's why the faces are obscured, and you just see the numbers in terms of like how many founders there are, and then even their hands are also blacked out. So, and there's like little bits and pieces in there of kind of alluding to the fact that not all of them are human if you look closely, but obviously all of this is obscure because everything is black on black. So using these devices and creating objects from this narrative has been a way in which I can continuously and find new and interesting ways to talk about the issues that I talk about in the work.
I like this, the incorporation of storytelling and creating one's universe.
Yeah.
Joseph Campbell, we wouldn't have had Star Wars unless George Lucas read that, read his work.
Right.
So just the idea, just the possibilities, because you're still a young man and you're a young Black man who creating a narrative inspired by this, we could have our own universe out of this, if you keep building on this narrative.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just like it's the idea of building a universe. I mean, these are the things that inspire, me. I think so creatively when I think about music, right? For the albums that I love have always kind of had skits where they've been, fixated or contextualized in a story. Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, like you're in a classroom where the teacher is talking to the students about love and like what love is throughout this entire album. Like it's like starts from the teacher taking role to the skits interspliced between these songs of the what do these kids think about love, the idea of some more hip-hop like Kendrick Lamar, like thinking about his different albums, like there's songs on different albums that complete a story. So one story will start in one album and then you'll get a different part of the story in another album, and it's just like to be able to give the viewer or the listener in that regard something to decipher while piecing together a story while also learning something is something that I always find intriguing when I look at creative output. So for me, I've been flirting with this idea of like putting things in fiction. I've done it before in projects, but this is me kind of I think the works in this show is me really just taking a step where like this is what I want to do and this is what I'm creating. I've been kind of thinking about this idea for a while, but it's like taking the actual steps to create a world and to make work from that world now. So for people who follow my work, they can start to piece together the story after seeing different projects come from me. So for this story, now there's been the works that are in this show, and then I also collaborated with a writer friend of mine, Joan Moreno, with literary project, and that's up right now on we put that up on Apple iBooks, and that is also part of this universe. In there, you're getting a declassified client journal from the Thorn Institute. So it's like being able to pull different projects out of this idea has been fun for me, and I can explore different types of ways of storytelling.
Well, I do like the mix of visual storytelling with literature. So I'm a big fan of Clive Barker, the the books, and but also he was great at universe world building, but and creature building, and he painted all of his creatures. He was a painter.
Okay.
And he started. I mean, he just kind of started from the opposite end that you did.
Mm-hmm.
Like you start with the visual storytelling, and he starts with the novel.
Mm-hmm.
And then but then it still comes in the middle with the visual, still combines the visual and the literary.
Yeah.
But this universe, and I love stories. I love a great story, and I love science fiction. And it seems like this is the genre that you're in.
Yeah. I mean,
so
stories of Anansi, the spider, obviously, like, I mean, we call him Kwaku Anansi, but like, that's, but it's just the idea of, a god of storytelling, right? Like the idea of storytelling being such a important part of, West African culture, more specifically like Ivorian culture. Like, that's how we, I remember me sitting down, always asking questions to like the elders in my family, and of, and hearing stories of, them growing up as children, or them, giving me, fables that there's a message in it that you don't really understand, something random, and it's always like some wild story that like, or a saying that doesn't really make sense, but then there's like a nugget in it, and I always found that interesting. I always wanted to hear those stories. Yeah.
So do you think that, as I'm thinking of storytelling and how, in like West African traditions, as you were saying, from your ancestors and your relatives, Ivory Coast,
Yeah. Côte d'Ivoire.
your
No, it's Côte d'Ivoire.
Côte d'Ivoire, and just this tradition of storytelling and passing down a history and an identity, but there's also, I think, potential in therapy, where we find what we have in common, and we have that thread that connects us with the past through storytelling, but also what is talk therapy other than telling our story?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what talk therapy is, like, really about, recounting. I mean, you're really kind of parsing through the nuances of your story. And I mean, I think that even when people talk about, self-help, doing better, like personal achievement and all this other stuff, there's always this idea of like, entering a new chapter of life, writing a new chapter in my story. Like I'm, talking about, turning the page on whatever this, stage of life is. So I think there's that, that comes up often. I mean, uh, I think the idea of going to talk to somebody about, what's going on, speaking through an issue, I think is inherently in our culture. I just think that certain elements that have come from exterior have pushed us away from it, because there's always been people in communities that you go to seek counsel.
Oh, like the elders or the church elders. But we also have, I think we mentioned before, with the aversion to seeking therapy, that, you know, don't put your business out on the street, that they're, and this is part of this generational trauma, I think, especially for Black Americans, where we have always been depicted as messy. But everybody's messy. The thing is, white people have many examples to choose from. Black people, when it comes to representing us, is usually just the messy.
I mean, I think that's, yeah, I think, you know, that makes sense. I feel like that's a representation, no problem.
So we have so I was talking, like, the aversion, connecting it to the aversion to talk therapy, is that because our representations that have always been messy with nothing, with no alternative, that there is a fear of putting things out there that make us look bad, because there's so much out there that does it already.
Yeah. But I think that idea of a fear of looking bad goes further back than you know, reality TV. I mean, I think that, you know, people's grandparents, just the idea of keeping things, not trying to put your business in the street. Like, that's people's grandparents were saying that. That's not like.
Mm-hmm. So I think that some of the aversion towards or some of the aversion from talk therapy
Mm-hmm.
with Black people
Mm-hmm.
is a fear of looking bad, of giving, you know, the man ammunition. You know, we were already going back to the topic of Blackness with the show at Latchkey. And I was saying, you know, the pathology of Blackness. And Black people, you know, the stereotypes of being dirty or messy, or having messy lives even. And I remember my mother, like, we had to clean before anyone came. I'm talking about cable guy, plumber, even the cleaning lady. We had to clean before the cleaning lady came, because she said, I'll be damned if I'm going to have anyone come up into my house and talk about me, talk badly about me. And I think there's a hypervigilance.
Yeah.
Not to give anyone ammunition for negative representation, because there's so much out there.
Right. When there's like a community that when one member of that community does something wrong, it's looked at as an anomaly rather than, you know, indicative of, you know, just like an underlying pathology in terms of the entire group, and an underlying like behavioral trait. You start to get people start to get hyper, like you said, like hyper vigilant of, like, in terms of how they outwardly, how they represent themselves and how they are seen. I think that there's a real conscious effort to try to present ourselves in a way that won't bring any quote unquote unnecessary attention, unnecessary negative attention on us, because how we are seen and how we present ourselves to other people is a direct correlation. A lot of times our ability to feed our family, our ability to move around in society, and all of these, you know, all of the other things that relate to that. I think that you have another element when we were talking before about, you know, Black men and mental health. There's another element of like toxic ideas of masculinity where that dial is like turned a little bit, it's turned more to one side when it comes to Black men, in terms of like how in the higher, in the kind of perception of, or the white imagination where the idea of Black masculinity is sort of a hyper masculinity, right? Like the sexualization of the Black body, like the idea of like athletic prowess, and it's all of these kind of like superhuman physical attributes that create a manly man. So even operating as just existing as a human being, you're judged on a different rubric. And
yeah, we call like, even like, just the colorism with men. Like, we mess with like Steph Curry or Drake, You know,
Less
oh, light skin,
inherently
soft light skin guys.
as not as strong of a black man because of, you know, X, Y, and Z. Yeah, I mean, I think that that's all a part of it. And then there's the idea of like, oh, you needing to help mentally, um, for something. You need help. Having to seek help is people perceive as an inherent sign of weakness. And weakness when there's like a slippage there where you think that weakness is inherently going to make you susceptible to even more danger, and you not being able to protect your family, black women not seeing you as strong enough to protect them, black men seeing as you not strong enough to be a brother or a father or this, that, and the third, you not being adequate, you not being valid. Like when you place um, your access point, your pivot point, your center, um, of worth exterior of yourself, when you require external validation in order to make yourself feel as a whole being, you're constantly having to perform something, right? So that's why it's like all of these, like when we were talking before about black men, it's like all these black men performing this idea of, you know, what is seen as strength rather than actual strength. So yeah, I think going to, you know, the topic of what we were talking about, this this idea of trying to hide one's baggage, trying to hide one's dirty laundry, like cleaning before the cleaning lady comes, or comes, trying to hide one's dirt, so to speak, is in a way to present yourself to the world that you don't have any problems, because being seen as having problems means that you aren't valid.
Well,
Because
also, it seems like
of work,
when something is wrong with one of us,
it's something wrong with all of us.
right? It's not an anomaly.
Right.
It's not like if a white kid shoots up a school, oh, he's that one mentally ill, you know, outlier. No, if a black person shoots up a school, that's just what black people
All
do.
y'all are dangerous, everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean that's a, you know, that's also I mean, but that's a conversation that's been going on even like forever. I mean, also, even if we were talking about in the context of art and the time sense of creativity, and I mean creative disciplines, like across the spectrum, the idea of, you know, representing black bodies in a specific way as to not reinforce stereotypes. I think that might also be another reason why we don't have more. I mean, before this we were talking about Candyman and stuff like that, but we don't have more, you know, black horror. There's this idea of not causing more trauma, not adding to the pain, not adding to what the, you know, struggles that we already have to endure, not adding to the negative, to the plethora of negative images of black people, you know.
Well, also, our existence in the Western world is a horror movie.
Right.
So do we really want to pay to see, like, you know, us get
that.
mutilated and maimed and chopped up?
But then I think it's the job of us creatives to be able to operate in that field, and then and to present more compelling, you know, to present compelling stories. Because if you want to think about the horror story that is the history of, you know, enslavement and colonization and all of these things, and then our engagement with the you know, medical field and everything like that, I think that, you know, the horror movie villain isn't us, which is funny because you see that in Jordan Peele's, you know, Get Out, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's that kind of situation. So I think there's ways in which to go about doing it, and I think when we talk about, you know, aesthetics of, like, you know, you call it like the dripping, or like, you know, sometimes my figures might be, you know, missing a limb or have you know, 2 or 3 arms, or these kinds of things. I think there's room in that to talk about the reality of the situation while also engaging in these aesthetics that I think people might have been scared to tackle because they're so scared of like how we are viewed.
Well, I think it's time to rip off the Band-Aid. So it's time.
About protecting our image. You know, I think, you know, and I think, you know, artists have been doing that.
Yeah, but I'm glad you're taking it on. And with horror, I think we had another conversation about Jordan Peele. There need to be more. You
Yeah.
know, right now we got one. You know, we need to have more than one.
Yeah.
And so I hope that. Well, I'm really glad that you're into the storytelling, as I said, both visual and the literary narrative. And you know, you're young. I'm looking forward to seeing, you know, what your production.
Thank you. I am too.
It is. I really.
Project.
It's really interesting to watch, you know, your career progress.
Thank you.
And just being a young Black man who is open, you know, about mental health and treatment and making this, you know, and keeping this at the forefront in the Black conversation. You're needed. So Marvin, thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you. Thank you. This has been an excellent conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we could have talked about so much more. And I'd like to thank Latchkey Gallery again for inviting me for this.
Thank you, Latchkey.